Okay, so this screencast is going to take us through a section B exam question. First of all, we're going to have a look at some of the key terms in the question so that we know what it's really asking us. Then we're going to have a look at the mark scheme, and we're going to be looking at some of the points that we need to fulfill to get into the top two bands. We're going to be coming up with some ideas of our own, and we're going to be answering some questions. Okay, so the screencast should only last 5 or 6 minutes, but I want you to pause it as you go through it to make notes, and especially want you to pause it for the questions that are embedded into the screencast. Okay, there's about 6 questions, so it's really important that by the end of it you've got 6 quite thorough answers for those questions, because those answers should hopefully form the basis of your plan for when you come to answer this exam question. So we're looking at a section B question, which is always a discussion question, and this one is on objects of desire. So the question is, or the task even is, a few material objects are needed to fulfill survival needs, such as food, warmth, and shelter. Apart from these, the value we place on material things is purely symbolic. Discuss this view of objects of desire. So what we're being asked to do isn't necessarily to answer a question, but to discuss a topic. So I want us to kind of scrutinize some of the key terms in this task, just so that we've got it clear in our minds what we're really being asked to do. So the keywords that I've highlighted are value, symbolic, and discuss. Okay, so value. Value is the regard that something is held to deserve, the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. And I think the second definition is really applicable for this task for us. Principles or standards of behaviour, one's judgment of what is important in life. So when we're thinking about value and the value we ascribe to something, these definitions are helpful to remind us what value actually is. And then the argument that objects of desire and the material possessions that we own are purely symbolic, hold only symbolic value. I mean, this is a very simplistic definition, but something that serves as a symbol. So a crown, for example, has a denotation of a hat that the queen or the king might wear. But obviously there's deeper connotations of royalty, the monarchy, imperialism, and even broader generalized connotations of power. Okay, so most objects have some kind of symbolic value kind of endowed in them. And then I think this is the most important word to consider, this verb discuss, to talk or write about a topic in detail, taking into account different issues or ideas. So what we're being asked to do isn't to go in head first with our own opinion, without considering different perspectives. It's to look at the topic with quite a rounded angle, and then to gradually hone in on our opinion. Okay, so make sure that you're considering different perspectives when you take on this topic. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the mark scheme. As I said before, do pause this at any point to answer the questions. So it's it's a relatively simplistic mark scheme compared to some. There's only 4 bands. We're going to focus on the top 2 bands because I think everybody is more than capable of getting into level 3 or level 4. So, first of all, I want to look at this highlighted term in band 3. So you need to give some evidence to suggest an understanding of different theoretical approaches or theorists. So this really means different ideologies. It's just another way of saying different ideologies. So I want you to think about which ideological perspective would best support your answer, and how could you bring another ideological perspective in to reinforce or to counter or add a different slant to your argument. Okay, so do pause at this point and have a think about this in relation to our question. Okay, so moving on, again, to get into band 3, You need to lead with the notion of symbolic value in relation to objects of desire. When we desire an object, it may be in part because of its use value, but we usually desire it because of the object's symbolic value. For example, does the object express a desire for status? Does it reinforce the user's masculinity, their femininity, their individuality? Maybe it confirms their position in a particular cultural or social group. So you need to consider the symbolic value of objects and why these objects are endowed with this symbolism. How has that come to be? And what are the effects of that symbolism? Okay, so another question for you. Can you think of any theorists that have commented on the symbolic value of objects? Who were they and what did they think? Okay, moving on to exemplification. To get into band 3 and the top band, obviously, you need to be using apposite examples. So relevant case studies, relevant examples. Apposite just means relevant and appropriate to fit your argument and your context. Just to remind you of the question again, few material objects are required to serve survival needs such as food, warmth and shelter. Apart from these, the value we place on material things is purely symbolic. Okay, so don't just give an example of, say, a car, but thoroughly explore its symbolic value, link it to theories, and look at it from more than one perspective. So another question, if you want to pause at this point, can you think of any apposite examples to support your argument? For example, some might argue that a watch is desired purely for its use value, telling the time. However, from a Marxist perspective, a watch is desired as it appeals to our inner desire for status and approval. In buying into, say, a Rolex or an Omega watch, we're buying into a sense of false consciousness about our social position, while simultaneously fueling the capitalist machine that oppresses us. A feminist would probably also have a lot to say about the watch as an object of desire, as they're obviously usually targeted at men and a man's desire for control. Okay, and to get into the top band, your discussion needs to be well informed by conceptual material. So by this, we mean that your argument needs to provide appropriate concepts or key terms or key ideas. So another question, what key concepts or terms could be used to help answer this question? An example that I've given is commodity fetishism, which is when we ascribe symbolic value and thus fetishize an object. And this could help to demonstrate the way in which our concept of value is warped and influenced by our underlying desires and aspirations. Okay, so pause again at this point to think of a different key term or key concept that you could use to support your argument. And finally, to really achieve the higher marks, you need to at least thoroughly explore or even challenge the position. Okay, so approach it from your main perspective, but turn it on its head and look at it from a completely different angle. A part of achieving this is avoiding binaries. A binary is a dual opposite, for example, right and wrong. These binaries can be seen everywhere, but they can be seen especially in theory. So we have Marxism versus capitalism, or feminism versus patriarchy. And these are really helpful, these opposites, for understanding, but they can also limit our understanding. So the most successful answers are going to try and move beyond this kind of right and wrong binary and really explore and even challenge this position. Okay, so your final question is, how could you challenge this position? And by this position, we mean this statement. Is there a place for material objects that isn't wholly essential or symbolic? An example that I came up with is it could be argued that a favourite musical album, isn't essential or entirely symbolic, but subversive. Even though through the act of buying the object you are consuming, by listening to and enjoying the piece of art, you are transgressing your state of false consciousness and experiencing a genuine sense of consciousness. But obviously this argument kind of goes back round in a circle, because there is the problem that the album was probably produced by a big corporation like Sony. Okay, but if you can pause at this point and think about how you might challenge this statement, and when you've got all of your answers, you should have the framework of a plan to try and attempt this answer for yourself.